Hello and good evening, everyone. We will be commencing our event shortly. I would first like to run through some housekeeping announcements. Please be aware that the session will be recorded. Kindly ensure that your microphone is muted to avoid any distractions during the session. There will be a Q&A session after the guest of honor speech is delivered. Do leave your questions in the Q&A box anytime during the lecture, and we will attend to them during the Q&A session. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir Razak, Chairman and Founding Partner of Ikhlas Capital. Yang berbahagia Datuk Gan RT, President of MICPA, MICPA Council members, MICPA members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Malaysian Institute of Certified Public Accountants, MICPA's 64th Anniversary Commemorative Lecture. My name is Soraya and I'll be your MC today. Ladies and gentlemen, MICPA's Anniversary Commemorative Lecture is an important event in the Institute's calendar, and we are indeed privileged and honored to have with us today our guest of honor and speaker, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir Razak, who will be delivering the commemorative lecture entitled Towards a Better Malaysian Political Economy. Incidentally, we celebrated our anniversary on July 26. We shall now proceed with the main agenda of the day. Please join me in welcoming the President of MICPA, Datuk Gan RT, to say a few words and to introduce our distinguished guest of speaker. Over to you, Datuk.
Thank you, Roya. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir Razak, Chairman and Founding Partner of Ikhlas Capital, Mr. Sufu Kunyen, Vice President of MICPA, MICPA Council members, fellow MICPA members and accountancy professionals, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the MICPA Council, a very good evening and warm welcome to MICPA 64th Anniversary Commemorative Lecture. We are pleased to have with us esteemed members, colleagues, friends, and associates within the accountancy fraternity and beyond to listen to an illustrious luminary on the refreshing topic. The MICPA Annual Commemorative Lectures features prominently in the Institute's annual calendar and for more than 30 years have provided an intellectual platform for thought leaders, including a former Prime Minister, notable political leaders, and captains of industries to share perspectives on contemporary matters impacting Malaysian economy and businesses, the accountancy profession, and the process of nation building. On behalf of the MICPA Council, allow me to express our heartfelt gratitude to Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir Razak for making the time to share his insights with our audience today. Tan Sri will be speaking on the topic Towards a Better Malaysian Political Economy, which certainly is a highly relevant and timely topic for all, since it covers two aspects of our lives that we passionately discuss, the economy and politics. With this topic in mind, our lecture today undoubtedly will be a thought-provoking one, and we look forward to hearing from Tan Sri. Please feel free to ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of Tan Sri's lecture and share your comments, if any, on this topical subject within our present political and economic landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, Tan Sri Nazir, a friend whom I have known for more than 30 years, does not need any introduction in view of his immensely illustrious career and the many candid and thought-provoking ideas which he has voiced over the years, especially on nation building. Before I invite Tan Sri to present the commemorative lecture, allow me to briefly touch on a few key highlights about Tan Sri. Tan Sri is currently the chairman and founding partner of Ikhlas Capital. He is also the non-executive chairman of Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad and PLS Berhad. He enjoyed an illustrious 29 years career with the CIMB Group, serving 15 years as CEO and 4 years as non-executive chairman. He was a driving force behind CIMB Group's transformation from a Malaysian investment bank into one of the most successful banks in ASEAN. Tan Sri remains active in both philanthropy and advocacy. He founded the CIMB Foundation in 2007, and as a prostate cancer survivor himself, joined the board of trustees for the Urological Cancer Trust Fund of University Malaya. He also advocates for a more inclusive democracy to achieve national reset for Malaysia while the setting up of the Better Assembly. Tan Sri is author of the national bestseller, What's in a Name, which provides invaluable insights into contemporary Malaysia, a tour de force reference for corporate values, good governance, and a fascinating recount of his growth within the family that carries the highly revered Tun Razak legacy. Towards the end of the book, he shares the critical analysis of the Malaysian political economy and recommends a way forward for a national reset. Tan Sri holds a Bachelor of Science from Bristol University and a Master of Philosophy from Cambridge University. He was a visiting fellow at the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies and at the Bravonic School of Governance, BSG, Oxford University. He is also currently a member of the BSG's International Advisory Board. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir Razak.
Thank you, Datuk Gan, for that introduction, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning from where I am. I'm here in the UK. Gan, thank you for that introduction. Nice to hear you say complimentary things about me. I recall at the beginning of my career, you were this fancy KPMG partner. You used to bully all of us those days. So thank you for that. Distinguished guests, MICPA committee members, and firstly, let me thank MICPA for this opportunity to speak on this occasion of your 64th anniversary, and thank all of you for attending today. I'm very pleased such numbers of you are showing interest in what I have to say. I know many more illustrious individuals have preceded me in giving this lecture, but I would like to go on record as being the first one to deliver this address whilst COVID positive. Yeah, unfortunately, I have managed to catch COVID. I have told Gan, however, I've pumped myself up with enough medication to get me through both the lecture and then the Q&A session after that. As you know, I'm not of your profession, so I was a little bit surprised when invited. I always had a bit of a beef because I didn't get my first job at CIMB initially because I was not an accountant. That's what Datuk Robert Chiam, the interviewer, told me then. But over 33 years later, I think I've made peace with this personal shortcoming of mine. I learned to respect your profession. And in fact, I was even made an honorary CPA a few years back. And, in my early years in the corporate world, I think I loved the teaming up of it, the idea of teaming up with accountants. We used to create teams of people, and I always wanted accountants and non-accountants together. And, for me, accountants always helped me with the numbers, and I felt I could always help with the context, and that made a strong team. And in similar vein, today, I would not attempt to talk about the future of FRS or the accounting profession, but instead, share my thoughts on the Malaysian political economy as a whole. Yeah, after my speech, I would of course welcome questions, comments of any sort, and hopefully by the end, my agenda is that more of you will be advocates of a reset of the Malaysian political economy. In my recent book, I provide some historical context of the Malaysian system, i.e. the workings of our society, our politics, our economics, and how it has declined over the years. And as the corollary of that decline has been the growth of a three-headed monster that I think rules this country. Yeah, the three heads of this monster are identity politics, endemic corruption, and over-centralization of power. If you look at any of our ills, I would argue that they could be traced in one way or another to at least one, if not two, or all three of those heads. So to me, slaying this monster actually stands between us and a better Malaysia as a whole. Now, before we discuss the solutions, we should first agree on the problem. Yeah, Malaysia, to me, is not obviously a failed state, but we are a nation in relative decline. In other words, while since the turn of the century, we have shown decent economic growth and progress, we are losing ground to peers, and the outflow of talent, decline in productivity, and subpar investments do not suggest any reversal of this trend soon. Using a longer lens, older people like me and Gan will recall the beginning of the 1980s when our GDP per capita was on par with countries like South Korea and Taiwan. Some will say that our problem can be solved if we have better leaders or better ruling parties. Well, we've tried lots of that since 2018, and we are still here. In fact, since the Asian financial crisis, we've had many promises of change and reforms. We've had Islam Hadari, the new economic model, the government transformation program, shared prosperity, and so on, but none have gotten very far. It is surely time for us to acknowledge that perhaps the problem isn't the people or party in power, but a system that is both deeply flawed and extremely change resistant. The three-headed monster is strong and resilient. At some level, we are all creatures of our circumstances. I know, as many of you will also, very good people who go into politics with the best of intentions and imbued with the most compelling principles. But they soon find that to thrive or even just survive in the system, they need to make compromises. They need to be a little bit more flexible with their value systems, with what is right and wrong. And that turns out to be a slippery slope. Soon, they too become part of the problem. They defend the system that got them into power. They fear that reforms will cost them power, or worse, that they will be held to account for things that they did but should not have done. From my time at CIMB, I will always recall one bank branch manager in Indonesia who had an unimpeachable track record for a long time. Then one day, we discovered that he was siphoning money for himself. We were shocked. When we investigated, we found that he was stealing because his wife was suffering from cancer and he needed the money to try and save her life. He did wrong, no doubt, but it was hard not to sympathize with him or wonder if you would not have done the same for your spouse. The real issue was, why did our systems and processes allow him to do it? Human beings are fallible. We always need to be guided and governed by effective systems and processes. Systems must be designed to suit the times and the circumstances. Our original system, the 1957 Westminster system, was never quite right for our fledgling new multiracial state, even from the beginning. It of course broke down in 1969 and we had a reset. The new economic policy, Rukun Negara, new sedition laws, and government by grand coalition underpinned the new system, Malaysia 2.0. Yeah, so just remember this. The system we have today is not even the original one we had. Yeah, we have a 2.0. So why not a 3.0? That's my question. Now, the authors of 2.0 actually realized that this system should not last for too long. They knew there were interventions that were not sustainable and had bad side effects. So they actually put a time frame of 20 years. Unfortunately, the system built in its own protective mechanisms, and now it is 50 years and this system is still chugging along. So it's not surprising that this system is no longer fit for purpose. In fact, it has arguably become positively dangerous, like a machine that is way past its recommended shelf life. We have needed a national reset, a Malaysia 3.0 for some time. Better, in my view, late than never. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with this conviction that Malaysia needs a reset that I wrote a letter to His Majesty Yang di-Pertuan Agong on behalf of a diverse group of 55 prominent Malaysians, including the late Tun Archa Ayub, Tun Musa Hitam, Tun Hanif Omar, social activists, business leaders, union leaders, former civil servants, and young Malaysians. We believe that a parliament of politicians and political parties is not the right setting for deliberating long-term structure changes needed for a national reset. Political partisanship, party lines, and re-election priorities cannot be the basis for opining what is best for Malaysia in the long term. We studied the recent trend of citizens' assemblies in other parts of the world where there have also been frustrations with parliaments to engender structural reforms. Ireland, Belgium, France are among 28 countries that have set up such assemblies, and reflected that Malaysia's last reset back in 1970 also was based on a similar consultation process. So we proposed the setting up of a citizens' assembly to deliberate reform ideas and bring recommendations to the government and parliament. The key issues would include, but not be limited to, institutional reform, education, affirmative action, electoral reform, the role of religion, and the state and federal balance. We provisionally named it the Better Malaysia Assembly, or Sidang Rakyat Malaysia. The composition of BMA can take many forms. The Consultative Council of 1970 comprised 67 persons selected by Tun Razak, who had absolute power at that time. The recent trend, though, is for citizens' assemblies to comprise mostly of randomly selected citizens who deliberate proposals presented by subject matter experts. I think an assembly of randomly selected citizens would be more in line with the maturity of our democracy today. Why not trust ordinary citizens to deliberate and arrive at recommendations for reforms? There are, of course, details to decide, but at this stage, what is important is to obtain a national consensus that a reset is needed and that a citizens' assembly is the right platform to get us there. We were recently advised that the current cabinet does not agree with the idea of setting up BMA. So we will have to try again with the next cabinet, which apparently is coming soon. Meanwhile, some of our signatories have become members of various all-party parliamentary groups focused on specific issues like corruption and political funding. I myself am a member of the all-party APPG on governance and anti-corruption. I guess the point is, if you can't get a Better Malaysia Assembly, then fine, we'll wait for that. Meanwhile, we try and do what we can. And to be fair to Parliament, they have also made some progress with Undi 18 anti-hopping laws. But the bottom line is, Parliament and political parties will not bring the national reset that the country needs, at least not in the time frame that we desperately need it. We need a Better Malaysia Assembly. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what could a BMA consider for reform of our political economy? To be clear, my interest is first and foremost to advocate a process for deliberating and recommending reforms. So my ideas are just what I would think are worth tabling at such a BMA. And the idea, what is the agenda? Well, what is a better Malaysian political economy? Well, to me, it's better economic growth, stronger democracy, and a more judicious sharing of wealth and income. And to me, the key enablers are a business sector that is competitive and resilient, impervious to politics and politicians, where innovation and entrepreneurship thrive, and which is attractive to investors and the best talents. So here are 5 suggestions I would submit for consideration of the BMA. Firstly, I think we have no choice, but we must start with a war on corruption, and at the core of it is for institutional reforms. Corruption is no doubt Malaysia's single most critical systemic issue. We can only cure, which I mean minimize, by approaching the problem holistically. We have to address the balance of power between institutions and how they check one another. As I've suggested at another forum recently, we should look at the successful Hong Kong model for tackling corruption in the 1970s. Hong Kong went from a system where corruption was not just endemic, but almost cultural, to having an administrative system that is clean and credible and a highly competitive business environment. Of course, there was noise when I suggested it, because it would also, the Hong Kong system also brought in amnesty for past corrupt dealings, except for the most extreme. But I believe we do need to create a dramatic break from the past. I doubt more than a handful of people in Malaysia can say that they have never done something that could be deemed corrupt, like duit kopi to move one file from one table to another, or turning a blind eye to someone who did it for you, to overly generous strokes on the golf course and unusually high bets maybe for a client. And so I think if you don't have an amnesty framework, you're actually going to create overwhelming resistance to a new framework for combating corruption. So let's give everyone a fresh chance, a fresh start. This amnesty is then paired with zero tolerance for any form of corruption or bribery moving forward, no matter the amount or whomever is involved. Critical to the success of this idea is then the existence of an independent and effective anti-corruption body who can investigate and prosecute without fear or favor. As long as critical agencies such as the MACC reports to the Prime Minister and the executive, it will always be seen to be vulnerable to political bias. Similarly, one needs to consider separating the prosecutorial power of the Attorney General and the reporting line of the Election Commission, which is the referee for political competition. Once these institutional reforms are in place, then we can look to introduce political funding reforms to curb money politics and minimize the link between politics and business. There must be enforced limits on political funding or spending, or else politicians will just dance the tune of bigger business. But make no mistake, money is needed for political mobilization in any democracy. And you have to accept that. But regulation and enforcement, as in many countries, is necessary. Otherwise, money dictates the outcomes of politics. The second key reform I would like to contemplate is a new framework for GLC reforms, so that the government will focus on the right business activities or exit from businesses. And to that in mind, I would group our GLCs into 4 buckets. One, strategic companies. These are like MAS and Tenaga, which the governments consider strategic. And these companies should make transparent their mandate and make clear that their KPIs are beyond shareholder returns. So that's one group. 2 is what I call GICs, or government investee companies. These are companies which the government owns through the likes of EPF and PMB, because there is insufficient private capital to invest in the likes of Maybank and CIMB. These companies will be left to operate completely like private enterprises, and we might even need to build in some limitations on the government's voting as major shareholders. The third group are government agencies. These are like Bank Pembangunan and Felda and so on, where these in many cases actually need focus and transformation. In the case of development banks, actually need consolidation. And the fourth group will be businesses for sale. Once you group them into all those 3s, there are many businesses which the government is in that they shouldn't be, and we should go through a process of privatization. And such sale process can build in Bumiputra preferences, but must always be determined by competition, not by politics. The third thing I would recommend is innovation with taxation. I think the current debates on cost of living, food prices, subsidies, etc., is always out there. And MOF has recently announced that this year's subsidy bill is almost 80 billion. Well, we need to balance the books, and sooner or later we need to widen our tax base. But beyond GST or SST debate, we need to consider other avenues for taxing wealth and excess profits. This is being done all over the world. We have to innovate with our taxation. There's just no two ways about it. But of course, raising taxes should not be done in isolation. We should also need to find ways to rebuild trust in how the government spends our tax dollars. And on that score, I would also propose introducing fiscal caps on government spending. And Indonesia has introduced this very successfully, where the government must not spend more than 3% in terms of their deficits. And the point is, without a spending cap, every government in power is too tempted to overspend, as you can see today in the UK. That is the lively debate here in the UK. The fourth recommendation is to recalibrate with affirmative action. Here, the war on corruption should tackle the abuse of the NEP for political gain contracts, but contracts for Bumiputra must always be competitively tendered, not just awarded. And we should, of course, need to refocus our NEP on developing entrepreneurs. The NEP has been successful in developing professionals, but not so much entrepreneurs. And two key ingredients here is that bankers and society should be less harsh on business failures. I think, if you're too harsh on business failures, people won't take risks. And secondly, government support should be shifted away from too much government loans, to more government equity, because loans have to be repaid. Equity is risk sharing and how one better develops entrepreneurs for the long term. The fifth and final point I would like to bring up is how to place youth and diversity at the heart of our businesses and economy. I think some form of national leadership intervention is needed to urge companies to embrace diversity and youth. Embracing diversity requires that we all go against what comes very naturally for every human being. But we must recognize that in Malaysia, diversity is power. And we must harness that power and at the same time bring this nation together. So companies, private and public sector must be incentivized or penalized if they don't have sufficient genuine diversity in their senior leaderships. Similarly, for youth, my recommendation is that all companies be encouraged to have young people on their boards. I think quite clearly, generational gap is wider than it's ever been between me and my son's generation versus me and my father's generation. And so I think we can, if we put, every board has a chair for a member of the youth, say between 30 and 35, which is of course rolling. I think boards will have better appreciation of youth, and the youth will have invaluable lessons for the future. These 5 ideas are, of course, ideas that I think will certainly weaken the three-headed monster that I spoke about, because they tackle major root causes of corruption, power concentration, and identity politics. But reforms on the social-political front will also be needed if you actually want to slay the three-headed monster. I think certainly a priority will be electoral reform, how we choose our leaders. Today, a lot of our problems start with the fact that our constituencies are delineated that way. You have constituencies that are 95% Malay, 95% Chinese, and guess what that translates to in terms of behavior of politicians. And of course, we need to reform our education sector. That's absolutely critical. We need to go to school together, and we need to improve our schooling. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude by saying that it is time to reset Malaysia. By reset, I mean a holistic recalibration of our political economy, our democracy, and how our society works. My collaborators and I have put forward a proposal for the process for reset. We need support and ultimately buy-in from political parties and our institutions. This BMA is not the panacea for all our ills, obviously, but introduces a process to which we can start to meaningfully tackle our systemic issues in an environment that invites thoughtful deliberation and consensus building, instead of the kind of zero-sum thinking and distrust that you see in Parliament or the political platform, political parties' platforms today. When I was searching for my 54 collaborators, I remember many of them initially refusing to be associated in my letter to His Majesty, because they said, "Oh, I cannot be on the this list together with that person or this other person." For instance, the group from Majlis Perundingan Melayu could not fathom being on the same side as Dato' Ambika, who was a well-known liberal reformer, for instance, or J. Solomon of the Secretary General of the Trade Union used to burn my effigy when I was a CIMB CEO. But my response each time was the same. Everyone should find people on the list that they disagree with, because my idea is to show that, you know, we Malaysians on all sides can come together to collaborate in the shared interest of building a better Malaysia. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.
Thank you, Tan Sri, for that insightful session. Ladies and gentlemen, Tan Sri will now take questions from the audience. If you have a question related to the topic at hand, you may enter them into the Q&A text box. I would now like to invite Datuk Gan Ahti to moderate the Q&A session with Tan Sri Nazir Razak. Over to you, Datuk Gan.
Thank you, Roya. Thank you, Tan Sri, for the very insightful and raise some important issues, although some may say a bit sensitive. Yes, when we first came to know each other, or when I first came back in the mid-80s, we have the recession. In the 1997, we got the Asian financial crisis. Then you got 2008. And today, other than the Russia-Ukraine crisis, we also have currency issues, our exchange rate as compared to USD and other currencies. And therefore, and just like you also mentioned, very soon we could have a new cabinet, whether this year or next year, but very soon, yeah. However, as far as Malaysia is concerned, yeah, definitely I agree, we are not a failed state at all. Although there are many areas for us to further improve ourselves. With that, I think I'm also happy to see that there are quite many questions come in, and therefore I'll take the opportunity, Tan Sri, to pose the questions to you. Yeah. First is, the Malaysian economy is badly hurt by both the pandemic and politics. What is your view and advice to all Malaysians in order for us to gain back our economy and political stability?
Well, I mean, that's you know, kind of honed into very much the heart of my speech, where, you know, one is I do think that there is a system that is deeply flawed. And I always make the joke that Malaysia doesn't actually have an economy. We only have a political economy. So when politics is dysfunctional, the economy becomes dysfunctional. And so I think quite clearly, you know, when you add it all up, it's very difficult to reform piecemeal because everything is so intertwined, which is why, you know, I think it's very important for us to look at the system as a whole. And I say that because, you know, many people have tried to change the system. I don't think we lack ideas in terms of, you know, the new economic model was written by our best minds, you know, Andrew Shang and so on and so forth. But it just couldn't be implemented. And a lot of it is about the political will of implementing. And when you study the political will of implementing, it's really about the system as a whole and how, you know, politics works today. It cannot go on. We need to look at an overhaul. And when you overhaul that, you will find that when you start looking at it holistically, then I think you really have the opportunity to change how competition is, how GLCs and private sector lay out, how we bring merit to business in the system, and so on.
Yeah. Thank you, Tan Sri. Another question, again, related to the politics and also corruption. And the question is, what measures can be done to strengthen the political will to eradicate corruption and restore meritocracy and good governance in Malaysia?
Yeah, so corruption, if corruption was a disease, it's stage 4 cancer. That's where we are. So my argument is, it's so severe, we need to create discontinuity because everyone is infected, almost. Yeah. If you take a corporate kind of parallel, I remember when I took over Bank Bumi those days, I felt that the whole organization was pretty sick. Yeah. And the only way to transform the whole place was to create discontinuity. That means you kind of bring in reforms that shakes everybody up. Everybody knows that, look, a new order is coming into place. So we all have to change. We all have to be part of it. And, Hong Kong thought long and hard about this in the 70s. This duet kopi came from the Hong Kong tea money, if you remember, in the 70s. In Hong Kong, it was so corrupt. Everything required tea money. And they very dramatically overhauled the state of corruption in Hong Kong, and that's the kind of scale that we need to actually consider. Of course, that kind of dramatic scale may or may not is difficult for people to buy in. So what I'm doing at the moment, I'm working through this all party parliamentary group, and we are now looking at proposing legislation on institutional reforms. And key to it, as I said in my speech, is the total independence of the enforcement agencies, from the executive. That's very key because we've seen government after government use these enforcement agencies for their political gain. So everyone, you look at the enforcement agencies, and you're wondering, whether it's, they're doing political bidding or they're genuinely independent. So we need to bring trust and credibility back to this whole enforcement process. And that's, I think, a very key pillar to combating corruption in the country.
And Sri, another question received is to do with, it is not possible to demutualize the politics and business, partly because the politician needs the dollar to grease the wheel. In fact, the rakyat expected it. So what creates a vicious cycle?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, all over the world, we mustn't beat ourselves too much. All over the world, mobilizing democracy requires money. Yeah, and so the only way to address it is to accept it and to regulate it. Yeah, the problem here is that, this government and previous governments are trying to have this political financing reform. If you do not have independence in the enforcement agencies, it cannot be done. Because at the heart of political financing reform is transparency. So if you're out of power and you know that your opponent controls the enforcement agencies, are you going to go and declare who donated to you? You're not, right? So you need they have to go hand in hand. It's not just, come up with this legislation, everybody must declare donations and all that. That cannot be. Yeah. So we need to do it all together.
Yeah. Now I just want to talk about, there are a lot of incentives and schemes introduced by the government to help the rakyat. So the subsidies you talk about. The question is, how effective are the subsidies, and how do the banks facilitate to ensure successful outcome from the recipient's business?
Well, I mean, I think firstly, in terms of subsidies, we have a serious problem because, I think I'm getting subsidized on my petrol too, right? We must find a better way of subsidizing because the bill is way too high. And two is subsidies are absolutely necessary, but in the long term, they have to be funded. And Malaysia is struggling because, we have high debt levels and we don't have, we're not going to have the capacity to continue this kind of subsidies going forward. So, the only solution is, as I said, to basically bring in taxes. Yeah, innovate with taxation. I know it's controversial. People get very upset when I talk about windfall tax, etc. Well, it happens all over the world. I mean, to me, in the case during the height of the pandemic, what was so wrong with having a windfall tax for glove companies, right? Where is the value creation here? Because they're sitting there, they're doing good, a business which makes huge profits because there's a pandemic and people are dying. So what is wrong with getting them to pay a higher tax bill, right? We do it for plantation companies as well, and so on. So it's very, very key to sort out the other side of the equation in terms of the government's balance, government's funding, and in terms of the role of banks. Well, I think the banks can only do so much. One thing that a lot of people are bankers because they cannot do business again. So you don't want to get bankers to opine so much on businesses. What bankers can do is try and be as supportive as possible to give people as much room as possible. And here in Bank Pembangunan, I'm really pushing through a shift from too much debt to equity. I think it's very important that we recognize that debt is very dangerous because you know what it's like. I give you a loan, you have to pay back in a certain time frame. Well, COVID changes that time frame, and then you're struggling. You cannot make decisions because it's still there. But if you have that risk sharing and banks take equity, then it's a much more sustainable way of helping finance people.
Thank you, Tan Sri. I think one of the participants mentioned that they like you mentioned about our economy earlier, our GDP, and therefore the question he mentioned that many years ago when Malaysia was apart economically with South Korea and Singapore, would it be a good idea to see what these countries have done and see how we can copy or what they have done where appropriate, so that it saves us having to reinvent the wheel? Your comments, please.
Yeah, I think that the solutions to our problems are actually not that complicated, in terms of what we should be doing. I would recommend all of you read the New Economic Model, although it's a little bit out of date, but it was written in 2009, right? It came up very clearly in terms of what we need to do. Yeah, and we don't really, that's not the issue. The issue is how to implement those ideas, right? I really think, the best ideas are already out there. How to improve our productivity, the need to kind of reduce foreign labor, the need to invest in the green economy, invest in digital, blah, blah, blah. All that was there early on. So I'm sure they would have looked at the Singapore experience, should have looked at Taiwan experience, etc. So the real issue here, we need to go beyond this, because you kind of settle for the easy thing, which is, okay, give me another idea, right? Or give me another idea, give me another idea. But really, the ideas are all there. It's implementation, it's execution. And when you try and execute, you cause pain, or you disenfranchise someone, then it cannot be implemented. I remember when they talked about this needs-based affirmative action, the reaction from the UMNO support base was terrible and could not be implemented.
Yeah, thank you. Tan Sri, talk a bit about, since I'm accountants, just want to ask you a question. Someone had posed a question, said, what is your opinion on how financial data analytics can contribute to a better Malaysian political economy?
No, I think it has a huge role to play. Obviously, financial data analytics will help decision making, will help precision of action, etc. But it's double-edged sword, lah. If you look at data analytics as a whole and what is done in terms of your Cambridge Analytica, for instance, is very, very dangerous. So I think, as a society, we still have not quite come to terms with the full impact of digital and data, how much it can do, how much better it can make us, but also how much worse, right? And this balance, I think, is very key going forward. So, yeah, and people today, I think, on balance, I think there's a real danger that people really exist in the echo chambers. So today it's very hard to communicate with people, actually, strangely enough, right? When you talk about digital, you think, oh, it's easy to communicate with people, but actually it's very difficult because everyone just lives in their own corner of the digital world. And then you cannot persuade them. They won't listen to alternative views.
Tan Sri, there's one more question talking about corruptions. It's like cancers, and we are issues facing us in Malaysia. So you say we all recognize that the cancers and the issues, your proposal clearly should be implemented. How much resistance do you see to these reforms, and primarily from whom?
Well, obviously, there are two camps here. One is there's vested interest. People who make a living off the system are powerful because of the system. They will resist it. Yeah, naturally. The flip side is there are also the reformists who are too dogmatic, right? I also face problems on that side because I've tried to cajole some of these NGOs, some of the liberals to come on board with some of these ideas, and they are, unless you go 100% down this route, we're not coming along. So you have this. It's actually quite difficult on both sides, to be honest. And that's I really think that there has to be serious leadership on this, and in the end of the day, I guess hopefully at some point we will have a good a leader, not just a good leader, but a leader who's not who can implement because he has the political capital to implement the right things. That's the issue. Because good people get there and then they suddenly realize they want to implement, but they cannot, because as soon as they implement, they lose support. And that's the real complexity.
Yep. And thank you, Tan Sri. I think, because of the COVID-19, the supply chain is also affected. And right now, because of Russia, Ukraine, the cost of living also has gone up quite a lot, especially for those who are in a fixed income group. They're finding difficulties to cope with the expenses of they have. Now, therefore, with the current trends of reshoring global supply chains, do you believe that we are able to restructure our economy in time to take advantage of this trend? What are the critical action paths to be undertaken by our political and corporate leaders to take advantage of this trend?
I think there is reshoring, but there's also a big, alternative shoring, which is this China plus one or not China strategy. And there's a lot of geopolitical posturing here to make sure that ASEAN actually remains neutral, that Malaysia is a beneficiary of the shift in location of these businesses. And so it's a question of making Malaysia as attractive as possible, right, for relocation. Now, the issue is, of course, as an investor, you need policy predictability and political stability. And this is very key. If you ask any investor, what they need is certainty. And if you invest in a country and you deal one government, and then we've got a very bad history. This is one issue, I mean, which is that we had a change in government in 2018, and the problem was, I think the way the new government changed so many things set a bad precedent. Yeah, in terms of, the people were moved around and policies were changed quite dramatically. And sometimes you got the sense that things were changed just because for the sake of change. And that's very bad because, many countries change governments, but you don't get holistic change in civil servants, head of GLCs, etc. You just don't, right? So then you get predictability. You remember, say, Khazanah, we built Azman Mokhtar in particular built this incredible network, a global network of investors. And so did many of us. And yet, when the government changed, global investors suddenly say, how come, I don't have the head of these GLCs to even talk to, right? They disappeared. And so we had this massive discontinuity. And so that's a problem. I think, if we need to have a system where, the cabinet members change, politicians change, etc., but the civil service, the GLCs must remain in place. And in a way also, to some extent, I think you could also think of policies and directions which are agreed across parties. Yeah, you can disagree at the margin, but certain fundamental projects, etc., let's all agree. So this is where, okay, BMA is one thing, but even without BMA, you could actually have a more positive political culture here, where more things are done across the aisle. A bit like, the precedent set by Undi 18, where all parties supported it. So you could have a project like, I don't know, high-speed rail or whatever, where the government takes the trouble to engage the opposition, so that it's such a major thing that when the opposition comes in, they will continue with that project. So there's no disruption to us. And similarly on education, for instance, why not have a non-partisan way of dealing with education reform going forward? So I think even within the existing context, there are many more positive ways of leadership.
Yeah, Tan Sri. The other question is to do with, because of the COVID-19, we got a lot of subsidies. The government's also more relaxed or more caring and allowing people to withdraw money from the EPF. And of course, people will say the issue of withdrawing from the EPF will hit us probably 20 years down the road. Therefore, how would Malaysia tackle this rendering social society net, referring to the EPF savings? Yeah.
Well, I think that was completely the wrong decision. Absolutely wrong decision, right? We're going to have a social problem. So, but it's done. Yeah, it's done. And what we need to do is basically, get the economy going again, so that these people can earn again and build up their EPF savings. There's nothing we can do about it. It's already done, but it was a flawed decision, because, in the end of the day, if there is no money in that account when people retire, they become huge problems.
Yeah. Now, one more question here is, in what ways we as a normal citizen can support the BMA initiative, Tan Sri?
Well, I think, if you look at other countries, it's a very long haul. Other countries also, these kind of NGO groups, etc., they take a long time to move this. But eventually, what you see is many more political parties say that, if I'm in power, if we are in power, we will set up BMA. Yeah, so to the extent one is to voice out support for the citizens' assembly model of doing things. And if more and more of us talk about it, then hopefully more and more political parties will embrace it. I know a few political party leaders have said, look, if we get in, we will set up this citizens' assembly. And Muda set one up in Puteri Wangsa, for instance, as part of their manifesto. They set one up, and they basically invited ordinary citizens to come in, deliberate on education issues. It's quite an interesting experiment. And this is actually very cutting edge. If you look at many countries, like Ireland, for instance, when they had this whole issue of a national debate on abortion, they set up a citizens' assembly. I mean, can you imagine how powerful it would be if we sort of say, okay, look, these are the core issues, right, that we have, things like, the role of religion, secular versus the demands of the tenets of Islam. We have this issue of affirmative action, for instance. Okay, we all have our strong views on this, but why not we get ordinary citizens, sit down in a room and discuss, and deliberate and come up with the recommendations. In the case of Ireland, when they talk about abortion, initially 25% of people supported the issue of legalizing abortion. So they set up a citizens' assembly and they went through a very open debate about whether it should be or should not, and women's groups and all that, explained and all that. And suddenly they turn people's view, the public's view on the right and wrong of abortion. And so when they recommended to legalize abortion, they went to Parliament. Parliament said, are you crazy? The public only 25% support. But I said, never mind, we put to referendum. 67% supported legalizing abortion. Yeah, so you can see the deliberative process is fantastic because you're not listening to a politician, you're listening to someone like you deliberating it. And you pick people so that they have opposing views and then they discuss. You know what it's like, if I dislike your view, Gan, I will definitely mellow and be more positive if we meet and discuss your view, right? And you will hear my view, and then we will moderate, and maybe we will come up to a common solution, right? But if we sit at home, we don't talk, it's an issue. If we leave it to politicians playing to the galleries, we also never get anywhere. So that's why this citizens' assembly or deliberative democracy process is very, very healthy, and I encourage many of you to look in the new literature about deliberative democracies across the world.
Tan Sri, I think in the interest of time, it's coming to 7 now. I also probably just pose you another one question only. And second, I must bear in mind, as you mentioned, that you are the first speaker we have, not only on the COVID-19 positive. Yeah. So with that, I just want to ask you the last question, Tan Sri. Diversity and education. How do we ensure contributions to better political economy? It is easier said than done, but how do we actually practice and mean what we say?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I think firstly, I think that our children need to go to school together. Yeah, this is not saying be rid of vernacular schools tomorrow. But the agenda must be that we go to school together. And it may be a merger of vernacular national schools or some lessons together or something, that kind of model. It has to be done. Yeah, because if we don't go to school together, we don't know each other, we will remain polarized. That's one. Two is, we must change many things that divide us today. Even when Italy was formed, right, many years, I remember when they put Italy together, they say, okay, we now have Italy, now we have to make Italians, right? It's the same thing. Tun Musa was telling me, he said, what happened to that project? I said, what project? He said, when we got independence, we sat down and said, we are building a Malayan nation. Now we are building Bangsa Malaysia. In the NEP speech, second NEP speech, 1971, is very clear. The term, we must build Bangsa Malaysia. Bangsa Malaysia has been around forever, Some people say it was the 80s. No, in 1971, Modi said, we must build a nation. The NEP was all about creating the economic foundations for building a nation. Of course, you will always be Chinese, I will always be Malay. But first and foremost, we're Malaysians, right? And we must do things like stop and eventually having to differentiate ourselves, right? Whether we're born Chinese or Malay, you don't need to. It's up to you to be Malay or Chinese. It's yours, right? We don't, at some point, we should say, okay, after 2030, we're all born Malaysian, period. And then, in terms of schooling is quite key, but also in many things, and we also must also have anti-racism laws. I used to train a underprivileged youth football group, football. So I was watching them play one day and I was aghast, right? Because on the football pitch, they were cursing each other in very, very racist language. I got so angry, I went on the field and scolded the referee. The referee thought I was mad because there was nothing wrong with the terms they were using, right, to him. But, you know, I was saying, look, but actually, then I realized, actually, we don't know what's right and wrong. What can I say? What cannot I say? You know, so we must have legislation so that people know what is racist and what isn't racist. Yeah, and we must enforce, obviously, that kind of legislation. And these are some of the things we need to do to come together the nation. And unfortunately, this nation building project has been set aside for years. Of course, the new economic policy is divisive, right? By having affirmative action, both sides become very divisive. So you need to intervene to counter that. Yeah, I mean, it's on all sides. We must come together. We must go against what comes naturally. I mean, again, when I started, I remember I always had a problem. I was the only Malay in the whole of CIMB corporate finance then, right? And it took a long time to kind of basically say, for them to say, hey, look, maybe Malays can do corporate finance also, right? But those were the days. It's okay. Those were the days. And then eventually I used to tell people, say, look, I'm not allowing teams that are not racially diverse. And then I think CIMB got stronger because we had more and more racially diverse teams. And the way I did it was I had to tell, look, if we're really going to build a nation here, we must all come against what comes naturally. Right? We all like to go out with people who have the same background, like to eat the same food. We must break that. So as a nation, all of us must step up and break that affinity to our own race and reach out across. But, you know, it has to be a holistic plan. Not just rhetoric and not just one Malaysia and flags and stuff. No, real substantive policies of changing mindsets, changing education policies, so that we really come together as a nation. And it's a multi-year project. It will be 10, 20, 30, 40 years before it's done. But at least we need to get back on that track, because today we are living together, but growing apart.
Yeah, Tan Sri, I must say, MICPA as the lead local professional body in Malaysia, and despite your physical conditions, and you still took time off to share with us on your thoughts, on your, what shall I say, very inspiring, very insightful, and some sensitive issues and the challenges faced by our country. Yeah. And with that, I must say, thank you very much to you, Tan Sri, for talking on topics towards a better Malaysian political economy. And hope you get well soon, Tan Sri, and we meet up one day, yeah, when you're back. Thank you, Tan Sri, and good evening to all the participants, yeah, for joining us this evening, yeah. And on behalf of MICPA, thank you, and a good evening ahead, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Gan and Tan Sri Nazir. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our event today. On behalf of MICPA, I would like to once again express our appreciation to Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir Razak for gracing the Institute's 64th anniversary commemorative lecture and for giving such a succinct and insightful lecture. I am sure all our attendees found it to be very interesting and thought-provoking. To all our distinguished guests, thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon and for your unending support towards MICPA. Your presence has indeed added to the significance of the event, and we wish you a pleasant evening. We hope to see you at our future events. Thank you so much. Take care and stay safe.